Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Cameron Bartolotta, and I represent the 46th Senatorial District, which is in the cornerstone of the Keystone State, the southwest corner of Pennsylvania. And I'm very happy to be here this morning with a lot of our wonderful colleagues and our friends that are supporting this important issue. I want to welcome everyone to this announcement of the formation of the bicameral and bipartisan Youth Safety Caucus. Our goal as a caucus is to identify and implement evidence-based changes to our juvenile justice system that urgently need to be addressed. This includes the protection of the well-being of Pennsylvanians' young people while producing better public safety outcomes for everyone. I'd like to thank Senator Anthony Williams, Representative Mike Zabel, and Representative Natalie Mihalek for joining me on this mission as co-chairs of this caucus. Unfortunately, Senator Williams and Representative Zabel are not able to join us today, and filling in for Representative Zabel is another caucus member, Representative Dan Miller. So I want to thank all of you for participating. We have some members of the caucus behind me. Today, we will highlight our legislative priorities this session. Number one, keeping our families intact by requiring the use of community-based service instead of incarceration whenever it's consistent with public safety and the needs of the youth. Holding young people accountable while enabling them to learn from their mistakes and grow up into responsible and productive members of the community. And pursuing evidence-based policies that improve outcomes, reduce recidivism, and strengthen public safety for everyone. The Youth Safety Caucus will work to draft legislation this session to create policies that expand diversion, eliminate fines and fees, limit out-of-home placement and detention, strengthen educational outcomes, and reduce adult prosecution of Pennsylvania's children. The co-chairs will go into more detail about each component, followed by questions and answers segment at the end. And before I turn the mic over to my colleagues, I'd like to thank the broad coalition of partners who are supporting juvenile justice reform, including traditionally progressive and conservative groups, faith-based organizations, law enforcement, practitioners, youth advocates, and many, many more. This is a bipartisan and nonpartisan group that is committed to the cause regardless of politics. This issue is so important, and I believe that with the help of these partners and the members joining this caucus, this is the year that we will bring these bills to the finish line. Many of them are here today, standing with us in support of our goals, and they include American Conservative Union Foundation, Americans for Prosperity, Center for Public Justice, Children First, Commonwealth Foundation, Community Legal Services of Philadelphia, Defender Association of Philadelphia, Education Law Center, Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, International Association of Chiefs of Police, Juvenile Law Center, and the Youth and Art Self-Empowerment Project. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for being here and for supporting this work. And now I'd like to turn it over to Representative Dan Miller.
Thank you, Senator. I'm jumping in today. Glad to be here with it. I was telling him, I'm like, well, if Senator Bartolotta is here, then I'll come. So, listen, I appreciate being here with it and talk about briefly the goals and the mission here. If you didn't catch the task force report that came out, please do take a look at it. It should scare you about where we're not meeting justice in our state. And everything that we talk about is not a matter of not having accountability. Accountability must be in every part of our system. But by the reality of what we're seeing is our system needs help. It is blinking red. And the task force, I think, laid out a great report. The issues that the senator and her team are focusing on here are critical issues, in my opinion, first steps, but critical issues as to where we are. And talking about kids and money should ring everybody's bell a little bit here on how the system is working and maybe how it's not. And one of the things, of course, that was flagged in the report, in the task force report, was the reality that the number one reason kids are being referred into the juvenile court system is because they can't pay a bill. That's the number one reason. So that is a major problem. It is a major issue for it. So we should, and the plan, from what I understand, the plan of what we have here together is going to be looking to make sure that that's not happening. If kids have to go into the system, deeper in the system, it must be because that things that are supposed to keep them out of the system have failed. But the reality for it is we're not investing enough in the programs that will keep them out of the system. And we're not investing enough in the diversion aspects. That is just when a bump comes up that we tilt them into success. And that's got to be the path. Anything else that just pushes kids into the juvenile justice system is a problem for us. And that's the reality for it. The majority of kids that are coming in, and I was a juvenile public defender for many years, when these things come up on the finances, it is a ridiculous conversation for us to be having with a 12-year-old. It is a ridiculous conversation for us to be having with a 15-year-old. How are you expecting them to pay when they can't actually legally work? What are we talking about? And that doesn't even get into the fact about how much money that gets paid in the system from the parents. And a lot of the time, you're trying to get water from the stone because a lot of those parents are struggling to pay the bills at home in the first place. We should be giving them more supports and finding ways to give them positive outlets for what's going on at home and at school and in the neighborhood, right? And we should be having the money into real diversion programs that makes a difference and steers them away from the court system long term. The reality of it is too many kids who come into our juvenile system are staying too long and they're not going into a place where we need them to go, and that doesn't even give it the reality about the desperate impacts for kids of color who come into our system. We have a problem, and taking the money away from the kid issue is a major component. I'm very proud to be here today to talk about that briefly and stand with a bipartisan, bicameral coalition to start that process this session and get it done this session. Thank you very much for the time, and I yield to my great friend from Allegheny County and Washington County, from what I understand, Representative Mihalek.
Thank you, Representative Miller. I'm excited to be here this morning with my co-chairs, particular Senator Cameron Bartolotta, who spearheaded a lot of this mission and has been working with the Juvenile Justice Task Force for the last couple of years, and to our diverse coalition partners. What a great crew we have standing behind us. And it just goes to show, while we might live in divisive times, today we stand united and committed to public safety. We stand united and committed to protecting and bettering our communities, and we stand united and committed to Pennsylvania's youth. With a focus on ensuring that our juvenile justice system is actually working for our kids and working for our communities, we also have to look to our education system and its interaction with juvenile justice, and here's why. Representative Miller alluded to it. Pennsylvania schools refer youth to the juvenile justice system at a rate that is more than twice as high than the national average. More than twice as high. That is unacceptable. Over 50% of school-based arrests are for low-level, nonviolent offenses. Students in special education programs make up 1/3 of law enforcement notifications, and kids with disabilities are overrepresented throughout the juvenile justice system. We know that educational success is a key driver of stability in adulthood. Yet some of our policies stand in the way of that success, especially for our young people who sometimes make mistakes, minor mistakes, can't pay a fine. If we are to set everyone up for success, we must broaden our restorative tools at our disposal. When our first resort, not last, is to call in law enforcement and take our kids to court, we create a long, winding path to success instead of setting that student on the right track. This isn't to say that we let students off the hook. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The punishment should fit the crime. And there are plenty of crimes committed by juveniles that would not be appropriately addressed outside of court. But for that 50% who might be first offenders, might have made a minor error in judgment, might have an overdue fine, we're looking at you. We want you to succeed. Because when you succeed, we all succeed. That's why this bicameral, bipartisan caucus is working on legislation to enable schools to use a restorative approach and diversionary programming when it comes to addressing these low-level offenses. And that's why we all stand together today. So thank you for all being here, and thank you, Senator Bartolotta, for your mission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, representatives, and all of the legislators that are here today for prioritizing these issues. And finally, I want to talk about two policies that I have been working on with Senator Williams and Senator Hughes. Right now in Pennsylvania, many juveniles with low-level, nonviolent offenses are arrested and referred to court, and they can end up being removed from their homes and placed in detention or out-of-home placement while awaiting their first hearing before any criminal conviction. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. If a juvenile is charged with a serious offense before their first hearing, before they even go to trial, before they're convicted, they can end up in adult jail. And because they're juveniles, they are removed from the general population. So these children end up in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. And some of these kids end up behind bars in solitary confinement for weeks or months before any determination of guilt. Let that sink in. That is abominable. The trauma that exists because of those situations is something that we absolutely must change. Pennsylvania put no limits on which youth are eligible for out-of-home placement, and around 60% of juveniles in those facilities are there for first-time offenses or misdemeanors. This produces bad outcomes for kids, and it's not efficient for taxpayers. Youth are spending an average of 16 months in placement over the course of their cases, and for some juveniles, it's much longer. Pennsylvania spends 80% of its juvenile justice budget on out-of-home placement, between 100,000 and 200,000 per kid per year. This is many times more expensive than effective family-based therapy in the community. There may be some juveniles who need the kind of intensive intervention that can only be provided in an out-of-home placement. But filling those facilities with kids with low-level offenses, we not only limit their availability for kids with more serious needs, we create worse outcomes for these low-level kids. It is a lose-lose situation. The legislation that Senator Anthony Williams and I plan to introduce would limit the use of detention and placement to juveniles with the most serious offenses, whose needs can't be met in the community. Reducing the use of out-of-home placement has the potential to save Pennsylvania up to $81 million over 5 years. And it is our hope that we can reinvest that savings right back into evidence-based community programming and diversion, like Representative Miller and Representative Mihalek talked about. The last proposal I want to mention is one that I'm sponsoring with Senators Williams and Hughes to address the process for prosecuting children as if they were adults. Our conversation today has mostly focused on kids with low-level offenses who might not need as severe an intervention as we're currently using for them. But juveniles with the most serious offenses deserve to be treated as kids too. Research tells us that the human brain is still developing until the age of 25 to 28. Juveniles are much more susceptible to peer pressure, and they don't have the same grasp of outcomes or consequences as adults do. Yet Pennsylvania law currently requires many of these children to be automatically charged as if they were adults, a practice known as direct file. Direct file can lead to kids sitting for months in adult jails, exposing them to solitary confinement, as I said, to trauma and victimization. And research shows direct file increases recidivism, the opposite effect of what we should be striving for with anyone, but particularly our young people at the very beginning of their lives. Considering that nearly 60% of direct file cases of children are returned to juvenile court, dismissed or withdrawn, direct file represents a staggering waste of both money and human resources. The legislation we plan to reintroduce would require that all cases for children start in the juvenile justice system, which moves much faster than the adult system. There, kids can be evaluated by juvenile court judges trained in brain science and best practices for youth, and only after that hearing could the case be transferred to the adult system if needed. The goal of these policies that we have all talked about today, and of the Youth Safety Caucus as a whole, is to ensure that kids who are struggling are able to get the right intervention at the right time. We can hold our young people accountable while giving them a second chance, putting them on the path to becoming better citizens, and reducing their likelihood of reoffending all at the same time. Smart policies are good for young people, they're cost-effective for the Commonwealth, and safer for communities in the long term. So now we can open it up for questions, and we can direct your questions to the different House members or senators. And are there any questions? Looks like we nailed it. Well, thank you all so very much for being here. We really appreciate your support. We look forward to making a difference in the lives of our youth in Pennsylvania. Thank you so very, very much for being here.